We can open up this episode about creatine days, what they are, how to utilize them, and so on and so forth. Predominantly because a lot of people still think if I go to the gym, I need to destroy myself completely. And oftentimes it's not really the case. And you can use these type of days sometimes when you're traveling, and maybe restricted with some time, and still get great amount of benefit out of your training session. Just a couple of days ago, I was speaking to one of my guys who is really into CrossFit, and I sent him some workouts, and he's like, "Oh, is this all that there is?" I'm like, "Yeah, you don't need more to make progress, because your goal should not be leaving the gym absolutely destroyed. If you're a bodybuilder, then maybe that's the case where you try to reach muscular failure and whatnot, but there is more to physical health than just that. And let's be honest, bodybuilding at very high level is nothing healthy at all. So I'll let you open it up. What is creatine days? How to utilize them? What is the concept behind it? And do we benefit just physically from it, or is there maybe some links to how our brain perceives actions we take daily, and maybe there are some improvements there as well?
Yeah. So this is, we'll take a little bit of step back because we've done a video before. Specifically, the video itself was something along the lines of body weight training and why it's beneficial and why, the ins and the outs of that and why we really like it. But the creatine day is actually kind of locked into or very tied to body weight movements for a few reasons, and also explosive movements for a few reasons. So let's start with outlining the reasons why and why it's beneficial, and kind of the prerequisites on people that will get a lot out of this and people that might not really get a lot out of it, although most will. So number one, okay, let's just recap with your nervous system is filled with electrical current. And one of the substances that facilitates high action nervous system is melanin, right? Melanin acts like a semiconductor. It gets integrated into your brain, into your nervous system. And another thing that people don't know, some might, is melanin gets integrated into every single sense that you have, like the sense of sensation, the sense of hearing, the sense of visualization. All of that has to do with melanin. But more importantly, to the root with how it ties into this particular thing is melanin is in your endocrofumin cells, which is in your gut. It's in your cochlea and your vestibular organs, which are in your ear. It's on your skin. It's on the eyes, and it's on your hair. I have just described every single surface that interacts with the outside, right? All the surfaces on your outside, your eyes, your hair, and your skin, and all the surfaces on your inside, your ear, inside your ear, and inside your hole here in the front of your mouth or in the front of your face, going into your body. All of those surfaces interact with the outside, and they are filled with melanin on purpose, because melanin turns sensation of the environment or perception of the environment into electrical signals, because it's a semiconductor. And that then gives the brain the ability to move and get feedback from movement through space and time. Okay. That's the role of melanin in your senses, and every sense is protected. It sits in the middle. It sits between your brain and the outside. It acts as the communicator. Okay. That's very important in the sense of people that will struggle with a creatine day or feel like a creatine day maybe even beats them up or drains them mentally are people that lack melanin in their senses, right? And that is a thing to note, right? And this goes back to, our daily life habits and stuff like that. Hey, if you're always renovating your melanin sheets on the outside, on your skin, because think of your skin not just as interacting with the outside, it's also the main manufacturing place of melanin for the whole body, right? And so that can contribute to internally taking melanin into the places like your endocrofumin cells in your stomach and your cochlea and your vestibular organs in your inner ear and the retina and hair and all of that. But what does this have to do with movement, creatine days, and that sort of stuff? Well, if you have a lot of melanin, you have the action ability, the capability of creating a lot of electrical current. And if you are lacking some melanin in any of these substances, you can create a demand for melanin to move inside, because melanin is a mobile substrate. It can actually move from outside inward if there's a demand for it. So if you're placing a higher demand on the melanin sheets, for example, in your vestibular organs and your cochlea, because of you're a gymnast, for example, right? So you need really good proprioception of like your balance, et cetera, and all of that. And I will just give you guys a little, so this is your vestibular organs, and this little guy right here in the middle, that's your cochlea. The shell is your cochlea. The rest of the whole thing is your vestibular organs. And that is also located, all of that whole thing is located in this ear section right here. So you can see in the ear canal, and then the vestibular organs and the cochlea are right here inside your inner ear. Okay, in your endocrofumin cells, that's inside, it's in the lining of your gut. And that's part of what directly ties the vagal nerve to your brain. Okay, and then obviously your skin, and then your eyes. I don't have pictures of those, but basically it's telling you exactly how this whole system interacts with your brain. Okay, and now that is something that just cover the bases of. That's very important to make sure that you understand that you can place a demand on the electrical current of how you're doing the work. That's step one in the creatine day or explosive day, is that you want to make sure that there is some kind of demand on the things that you want to improve, right? So if it's balance and stability, you need to have a demand on that. The movements you select should have a demand on that.
So when you look at these movements, is there something that can be programmed in a training session for somebody outside of this, a creatine day, that might improve their ability to build more muscle as well, like hypertrophy and things like that?
The creatine day is probably not to be thought of in the demand on the melanin system. So yes, if you want to build a hypertrophy, is there a way to create a demand on the melanin system to innervate the muscles better? Yes. And that goes back to the episode about body weight and just moving the body, the head and the torso through space will create a bigger demand on the muscles that are creating that movement electrically. And that will create more demand in that local tissue to innervate better, and you'll be able to contract it better. If you have lots of melanin on the outside, like say biceps, for example, you have really tan arms, you do a lot of bicep curls, ideally, not bicep curls, ideally like bicep focused pull-ups, then in that case, you are going to create a bigger neurological demand for the bicep and potentially move more melanin into the nervous system there locally to integrate the muscle, to innervate the muscle, which can lead to greater hypertrophy. So that's a really brief synopsis of the body weight video that we have for specifically hypertrophy. And that ties into what I just talked about the nervous system, melanin, and how that actually governs movement. Okay. Now, specifically for the creatine day, it's more of a day where you're training a different system, right? Like muscular failure and hypertrophy are just literally trying to cause a glycolytic demand locally at the muscle tissue to create a bigger muscle. And that bigger muscle is mainly going to be filled with glycogen, electrolytes, all of the things that make up an actual muscle tissue, because you're creating a bigger demand on the substrates. And you do that through a glycolytic hypoxic type environment, which we talked about not too long ago, like 3 or 4 episodes back. in this case, the creatine day creates a demand on the ATP system, okay, specifically. And what that does for just about anybody, the value that it does is it brings the ability to innervate the muscles in a different way, creates a different stimulus. But more importantly, it also is a way to hedge against almost like what you've alluded to sometimes, where you gained a bunch of muscle tissue and then you get hurt. Why? Because you have poor control of that new muscle tissue and that new body weight moving it through space, okay? And the creatine day is a great way to incorporate a different training stimulus and innervate the muscle to not just with the ability to contract, at the joint, but also the ability to integrate it into your vestibular system and your brain. In other words, now your brain actually gains more control of how this new muscle tissue or new abilities can be used for locomotion. And that's an incredibly valuable and a very complex way to say, you just get better at using the muscles that you have now. And if you've been training hard, you have new muscle, right? So new muscles now get integrated into the whole system through a creatine day or a technique training day. So now that we've kind of
this is something I would, for example, say I repeat a similar training cycle every year, and people go, why are you doing the same stuff again? You did it last year, but I'm not the same. So which brings me to a question. Can you, before you go much deeper and people get really confused, explain a typical creatine day? Would it be, again, go in a gym and spend 90 minutes, 2 hours, 40 minutes, whatever actually it looks like? Because like I said at the beginning of the video, most people will be used to, I need to go in a gym and absolutely annihilate myself. If I don't crawl out of the gym, I've wasted my time, which might not be the case in this scenario.
Correct. So yeah, that's a good place to start. Let's outline a creatine day. What are the parameters that you need to kind of obey to make it an actual creatine day, and some tweaks that you can do to make it a creatine day into a technique day. We'll just start with the protocol, very basic stuff, right? So let's talk about let's just do a whole body creatine day. Okay, so a whole body creatine day, I would pick number one, body weight or very light weight of some kind. Ideally, something that you are moving through space in, not just like up and down or side to side, but also through actual time and space. That's way easier to do for the lower body, and I'll explain that one first. So a simple creatine day could be easily, literally skipping, hopping, or a combination of any of those things that challenges your ability to balance, maintain rhythm, right, and move through space. Okay, you have those three components: rhythm, balance, and moving through space with a very basic movement, skipping, for example. Just about anybody that I know can skip. If you can't skip, you hop, right? 2 feet, hop, hop, hop. You need skill to be low, but volition to be able to be high, and concentration to be able to be very rhythmic of, hey, I'm just focusing on the rhythm, I'm focusing on the landing, I'm focusing on, boom, the next step. And because it's body weight, and because the focus should be very low contact time on the ground. So you touch, you go, you touch, you go. Very quick movements. They become very explosive, and it's body weight. So you're probably not going to get hurt, right? Like if you're uncoordinated to the point where you can't hop, we got other issues, right? We got to do something different. But at the point where, hey, this should be very low skill, very safe, but at the same time, you can exert a lot of force, right? You can really get the hops to be really big if you want, or really long, or any variation in between. And I tend to change it up, right? So that's the movement selection. And
would you
what I do.
sprint as a selection of exercise for this?
Say that one more time.
Would you count a sprint, maybe with empty sledge, as one of possibilities for this?
Yes, I would, as long as the sled is very light. Like I want it to be basically empty so that you can really put a lot of effort into not the muscle contracting, but the actual movement itself, and contracting all of the muscles at once with the movement pattern, right? So that's That's the one thing, right? If the sled gets too heavy, then you're kind of focusing on contracting the quad, really getting through it with your glute. We don't want that kind of distraction. We want to
Only reason I'm
integrate.
mentioning it because it was my personal favorite for someone who is just starting to develop strengths, because they still haven't got that much of a balance. So actually holding on to something and gives them that.
So what you described there is a regression. It's a way to work into, again, that's why I said there are some people that will be uncoordinated to just hop. And then you gotta dial it back. This is one way to do that. Okay. So yes, that's a good way to kind of like, hey, if you need to dial it back because you don't have that skill yet, this is a great way to do it, what you just described. Let's just assume you do have the ability of that. So then the parameters become, and even in that situation where you're programming this for somebody who is trying to acquire that skill, the parameters are the work to rest period does need to be monitored pretty well. Not for the sense of keeping the heart rate high, but to make sure that you're targeting the ATP system, the creatine recycling system, right? ATP immediately gets depleted in any kind of explosive work. Now, a thing about all the systems, the glycolytic system, the aerobic system, and the ATP system is they are all working all the time at millisecond levels. But you can bias towards depleting one system or the other with the rest period, okay? So creatine set would be something like anywhere with 10 to maybe 15 seconds of work, followed by at least 4 times the amount of rest. So if you did 10 seconds of work, you have 40 seconds of rest. If you did 15 seconds, then you have more like, a little over a minute of rest. That's the best pairing when it comes to work to rest ratio. That will keep the heart rate, a little bit elevated, not to the point where you're feeling like taxed, but it will keep the heart rate a little bit on the higher up. You're not going to feel completely rested, but that's not the point. The point is the 10 seconds of work were explosive in nature and sensationally challenging. Like you're challenging the senses of balance, you're challenging the senses of feel, you're challenging the senses of hearing. This is a little tip. Try not to do these types of creatine type sessions with hearing stuff in your ears. Do it so that you can hear your footfalls. Do it so you can hear your landings. Do it so that you can hear your breathing. Get in the rhythm of the particular movement you're setting up, because of what I just said about the vestibular organs and the cochlea and the inner ear. Just so people might not know what the vestibular organs are. They're what dictate your brain's ability to tell where your body is in space and time. And that's very important because that raises the neurological demand on the whole system, and you get more out of the training. So if you are listening and you can feel, hey, my cadence is good, my sensation of movement is good, my balance is looking good, you're creating a bigger demand and you're able to actually contract each hop, right? We're talking about hopping much more aggressively. You're able to literally create more force, right? And 10 seconds later, you're done with that, you just rest. You repeat it again, you just rest. And I normally do it by timed period, like the amount of sets. 10 minutes is a long time. 5 minutes is just about right. But I have done creatine work with one movement up to 10 minutes long. But something like 5 or 6 minutes, which should be like three to 4 rounds, depending on what you're doing, is more than enough to elicit that demand. So that's for the lower body, just something very simple, very actionable. That way you can do high jumps, you can do just broad jumps, 3 back to back and then rest, or something along those lines. For the upper body, I like plyometric push-ups, especially from the knees for bigger people, because you can really put a lot of force into it, and you can go do like 3 or 4, boom, boom, boom. And that creates a demand that's just about right. You're moving your body through space. It's about 10 seconds of work, and then you rest. And then again, full volition. That 10 seconds of work to 40 seconds of rest ratio should mean that it's very repeatable. So how do you know if you stop at 5 minutes or 6 minutes or go all the way to 10 minutes? You are able to repeat the same level of effort, if not greater, the more sets you do. And the moment the performance drops off, in other words, I'm getting kind of sloppy on my landings, or my contact time is slowing down, or I'm just kind of feeling a little bit gassed, boom, that's over with. Move on to the next exercise, because now you are not taxing exclusively the creatine system. Not that you could, but now you're starting to tap into the glycolytic system. You're starting to deplete a little bit of glycogen, and that's not the demand we're trying to make. Think of this for a bodybuilder, this would almost be like a recovery day, but you still wanted to go into the gym and you've gained a lot of muscle tissue. This is something that you would put like at the tail end of a 14-week or 12-week training program, or at the beginning, depending on whether they're novice or advanced. But definitely at the end, it'd be very valuable as a day where you just come in and you just do this type of work to start to bulletproof a little bit of all this new muscle tissue so that you don't end up hurting yourself down the line, right? You're integrating the new muscle tissue into the nervous system and using it for the purpose that muscle tissue is supposed to be used for, which is locomotion and moving the body through space and doing work, right?
Would you be comfortable to suggest something like this for the gym addicts who are wanting to train every single goddamn day, to say to them, hey, train 2 days hypertrophy, do 1 creatine day, you'll still go in the gym, you're still getting your balls, and then do another and another and another.
Yes.
Would be this something applicable?
I would
probably, without knowing this, was just team sports, which go kick a ball, go play basketball, go do something like that. So I was doing it every single day pretty much, and maybe that's why I'm still so agile. But that seems like this principle is very similar to that, and people might benefit just by acknowledging that your workouts don't need to be something that destroys you. You can still keep making progress. And what you just told about people who are obsessed of just getting bigger, that this is also a preventative mechanism for you to make sure that you actually can control that new size, control that new strengths, which a lot of people disregard completely. I see it a lot in powerlifting predominantly, where they just do lifts and that's it. And lats get torn off and biceps get torn off and so on and so forth.
Yeah, because there's another hidden benefit in here, right? So we just talked about targeting the creatine system with the work to rest ratio, keeping the movement explosive so that each contraction is very ATP heavy in usage, and the rest period allows for the ATP to recycle, and you're basically just depleting that system exclusively, right? If you pick exercises that are body weight and bounding or explosive in nature, where there is some kind of a landing and the tendons now have to do their job, the tendons and ligaments have to become energy reserves. In other words, there is some kind of an energy transfer into the tendons and not necessarily the muscle tissues that gets reused and exerted again back. You are now placing a demand on the tendons and ligaments to act more like they should be acting. That is incredibly valuable for the thing that you just said, especially for people like strongman, powerlifters, people that are top end strength heavy, where their muscle tissue is basically there to grind out a lot of power through an extended period of time, which places a different type of demand on the tendons. They're basically there to hold the tension at that point, right? Like an 800-pound squat or anything that you can think of that a power lifter or a strongman is going to do. It's going to involve a lot of tension transfer through the tendons and ligaments, but the tendons and ligaments don't get used very much for that bounding and recycling energy effect. So you incorporate something like this to place a demand on that particular system in a very casual way that shouldn't be very taxing. And for somebody like that, like somebody like a power lifter or a strongman, you're looking more at like starting at the 5-minute mark, right? Like 2 or 3 rounds might feel like, hey, my tendons and my knees feel a little bit beat up now, right? That is a normal effect when you get done with it, with this type of training, because you're placing a demand on that. But the next day, you're going to get a different type of soreness. You're going to get a soreness where, and I know that you felt this, where it's like, hey, when I contract my legs and my quads, they almost feel like twitchy. They almost feel like there's a surplus of energy there, right? There's a lot of nervous system activity. It's because that's exactly the demand that we placed on it the day before. A lot of nervous system activity, a lot of ATP depletion and restoration, and the tendons are now functioning like they should as far as like bounding. So when you get up the next day, your legs or your arms or your pecs might feel like man, they almost feel like a little bit beat up, but almost in a good way. Like when I contract my muscles, they feel more energized. It's because there's a surplus of this type of energy. You're recycling the ATP system, you're recycling the basically the electronic transfer system of the melanin sheets, and the tendons and ligaments are also a piezoelectric system. In other words, the more you bound them, the more you recycle them, the more electrical current they can elicit. And that's actually kind of the side effect that you'll get when you've done a creatine day correctly. That's the type of soreness you should feel the next day. So there's a little bit of that. So that's a creatine day that you can do just like that. And it would be, some type of bounding for the lower body. It literally can be anything from, I do a combination of moving, like just bounding forward, skipping, hopping, that type of stuff, with just full out as much force as possible, like 3 high jumps or 3 broad jumps. For the upper body, I'll do plyometric push-ups in a 3 to 4 set manner. And then another thing that I like that places a big demand on like almost simulating the bounding effect so that there's a lot of rhythm is I like to lay on my back and use a medicine ball, something like 30 pounds or 20 pounds. And I like to throw it up and catch it, throw it up and catch it. And the point in that, just like the bounding, is very little contact time with the ball with your hands. It should spend a lot of time up in the air. The moment you catch it, you recycle that energy and throw it back so that the tendons in your elbows and pecs start to get that bounding effect of rhythmic bounding. And you keep the workload short, like 10 of those, right? So 10 seconds of boom, 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 and then rest for 40 seconds, then boom, 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 then rest. That's a really good combination there. That is the crux of the creatine day. Now, little tweaks to turn that creatine day into a technique day. Say you're a sports guy, like CrossFit athlete, field athlete. How do we get more out of that training to be more sport specific, right? So for example, a CrossFit athlete has to do some gymnastics in the upcoming event, right? So I would pair some of their, especially if it's upper, like handstand push-ups, handstand walking, things like that. What I would do is I would actually, because melanin sheets are environmental sensors, I would try to do some of their upper body creatine day work in acutely changing environment. And what that means is I would probably have them ice their arms, like just have some cold water running or something like that, and get your arms cold. Or right before every set, put some cold water on your upper body. Change the sensation of your melanin sheets on the local muscle tissue that's going to be doing most of the work. That will give you a different sensation when you're activating those muscles, because you're literally feeling more sensation, which then lets you learn more about the movement, right? Because the thing about bringing up a skill is that you have to come up with unique ways to gain more acuity for that skill. Unique ways is anything that changes the sensation of the movement. An easy, low-hanging fruit way to do is just change the temperature of the local tissue. It could even go the other way, right? Maybe it's not cold, maybe you make it hot, right? Maybe you're working out in a cold environment, make it hot, put a hot pad on that particular muscle that you're going to be doing that movement with, and then go do the creatine recycling day. You can do these now for technique. I would do it right before your biggest technique training day, or in a more frequent manner, because technique has a low SRI curve. Like, the curve for recovery on technique is very short. So you can do it more frequently, more of like a warm up, but you can include this little hack of temperature change. For a full on recovery day, I would treat it as its own day, and I would probably do it full body, or maybe you're just really beat up, on your lower legs or on your upper body, and you could do just a creatine day that's literally like a full body creatine day, like I described. It's like 30 minutes long, like literally 30 minutes, like 15 minutes for your bounding for your lower body and jumping up and down for your your high jumps and stuff like that, and 15 minutes for your upper body, and then you're done, and that's it. That's the whole point, is that it should be quick, it should be demanding on the nervous system, it should be demanding on the creatine system and the tendon ligament system. And then if you want to tweak it a little bit for technique, you do it before technique training, change the temperature a little bit, or the sensation. It could even be it could even be like wear some compression on the arms, right? If you're doing like arm training or upper body training, or the legs, right? If you're doing some bounding or creatine day for your lower body, just change the sensation that the skin and the local tissues will feel. Temperature is by far the easiest because you will see that and feel that change almost immediately. Clothing, it depends on the compression type, like how much that compression is happening, but any kind of sensation that you can alter that's not normal from your normal technique amplifies your brain's ability to cue in on those movement patterns more focally. You can do a little bit of this with drugs, right? Like things like taking a little bit of Nupect, or taking a little bit, my favorite is Selenk before training, kind of chemically alters the brain to be looking for changes in technique much more easily, right? And that's, skill acquisition and stuff like that has to do with, hey, figure out new ways to challenge that skill so that you bring it up more.
So is my assumption would be correct that when you use these kind of techniques, it's really beneficial for people who are firstly starting to advance in maybe higher rates that they might have expected, and this might prevent them from getting injured, throw in creatine day here and there. It's very popular now that bodybuilders do these deload weeks every 4 or 5 weeks, whatever. So maybe throw one of those there, maybe do it when you're traveling, and everything you described, it seems like it's quite challenging your cognitive capacity as well. So would it translate to your ability to think maybe a bit sharper, if that's the right thing?
Yeah, I was literally just thinking about that. You could even use a very quick creatine training session, like 5 or 10 minutes. So like 5 or 10 minutes of high jumps. It would even work with even shorter, like 3 minutes. And that would amplify the nervous system of your brain cueing into the environment, and you assessing and reassessing where you're at, and decision making would be amplified. You could use it before some kind of a meeting. You could use a creatine type workout, very short, very brief, to amplify neurological ability. Because at the end of a 30-minute full-on creatine day, you will feel kind of amped up at the end of that, but you will notice that you can tell that you've worked out. You can tell that you're a little bit drained. That's a little bit too long, like a 30-minute creatine day. You would want it around the 10-minute mark or shorter.
Yeah, this is something that I personally like to plan in almost every workout, just for not even I wouldn't say creatine stuff, but more of a balance stuff. Hey, go and stand on your leg for just lift one leg and stand on another one for a couple of times. Simple, silly things like that people used to laugh at, and now they're all just copy it because they're like, hey, what the hell? You're not getting injured. You're not doing this. You're not doing that. And everything we do is kind of well tried and tested. Like we discussed before we started recording anything, a lot of things are still scientifically not even proven, but they are catching up to it now. And a lot of the most advanced techniques usually come from old Soviet Union countries where they didn't have any kind of advanced equipment. So you used what you could. And more often than not, it was body weight, being outside and doing stuff that ended up elicit the best results when it came to actually performing at the end.
Yeah, and I think it's because nature literally requires you to be outside, and nature has already done the science for you. You just need to be enough of an astute person to realize that, and then start looking into how did nature do it, right? How does it work, right? And that leads me to a little tip here. The reason why I said the technique day, what the technique tweak is a temperature change, and I said cold first. That's the one with the biggest bang for your buck. The reason is not just that it changed the sensation at the local tissue level for the muscles that are going to be working the technique. What it also does is cold on your skin. If you have melanin on there, or melanin anywhere really, the cold itself signals. Remember, I've had a slide where there is dopamine and noradrenaline and all of those, and they come from melanin. When you activate it with cold, melanin gets turned into dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. If you're trying to learn something new, and you raise dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline on top of having new sensation, you can see how quickly the brain chemistry has changed enough that now you are able to elicit greater technique advancement. That little tip, it was not just, oh, just add some cold and you'll be good. There's a lot of science, a lot of biology, physics that has to do with why that works. And this is a little tip on, hey, that simple thing that you just said, where people just go outside and train and somehow get better, it's usually because there's some biophysics hidden in there that people aren't elucidating. So I felt the need to kind of bring that to light.
And we have mentioned that many times, that this is how Tony Robbins gets his events run. It's always cold. It's always a lot of movement. There's always a lot of like excitement. Everyone gets amped up, and that's why people get the most out of it, because it's not done just for shits and giggles. It's done to make sure that you attach the emotion to your movement, and now it engraves in you, and you basically become more active, more aware person, and get more benefit out of it.
That little tweak will go a long way with technique days to tweak the creatine type setup.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, David, and I'll speak to you next video.
Awesome.